Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you doing? Today's episode with Jen, she wasn't in the mood to record and was really hoping that I'd cancel, but I didn't. But she was okay with recording. We talk about a number of things, but we talk about relationships and who's the expert in your relationship and how we can often get dysregulated in relationships. Sometimes we have a need to explain and ask questions, and that can be annoying if you're on the receiving end and you feel like someone is questioning your sense of authority on yourself. And I know that I've annoyed quite a few people because I often will question why there's a rule for something, why there's a reason. I like having information, and I also tend to over-explain. It's how my brain works. We also talk a little bit about the importance of consent. And for me, I'm incredibly pedantic when it comes to words, meaning language, and having language used a certain way around me is very important. It has to do with how my brain is wired and having a sense of autonomy and control. And without having known this about myself for so long, I find this is how I work with other people. I very rarely will give people directives and tell them, but I say things like, I'm wondering if, or is it possible, or what do you think about? Because for me, it's so important to allow people to be the experts in their life and for me to not decide what I think I know is true about other people. And I talk about how I believe that my ADHD and my autism kind of relate, and when I'm not being so concerned about making sure that I'm showing up in the correct way socially, I am much more spontaneous and just kind of what my ADHD looks like, and figuring out how do I navigate these in different situations, because I want to be more authentic and more playful and more spontaneous and relaxed. And in certain situations, I just don't have the luxury of doing that, but it can be incredibly exhausting. So I think that is all I want to say about this episode. I hope you enjoy it. If you have relationships, friendships, if you are a parent, if you have a boss and coworkers, I think this is really relevant, and we talk about it from all the different perspectives of what it's like to be on the receiving end. And if I do it and that's, something that annoys me, I also do to other people. Just looking at it from all different perspectives. I think that's it. And now on to the show. Hey, Jen.
Hi, Patricia.
I know you don't want to be recording today. You want to talk about it?
I guess I could grumble about it for a minute.
Grumble.
I don't want to record today.
Yeah, tell me.
I'm like achy. My brain is going to scrambled eggs kind of regularly. I've had a lot going on. I love being here and being with you. And if you had canceled, I would not have been upset about it.
I get that.
Yeah, I love that there's space between us to be able to show up and say that. And it's funny, I think, because you and I have a long history of that, right? Like, I think every week that we recorded for the HSP groups started out with a lot of, I don't want to do this. And the funny thing, I learned a lot through that, in that I can sit and not want to do it and do it just fine. And when I can be authentic, it makes it so much easier. And I learn. I think before that, I would have thought that if I was having the thoughts, I don't want to do it, that meant I shouldn't do it. And we've had so many occasions where I show up and I'm like, blah, and then I always say, and I just said it, I'm going to say it now again, that this one might be the one we have to trash.
I reject that.
It does something for me though,
Yeah. Well, maybe part of that is giving you permission that the bar is so low that you don't have to perform from the top down, that whatever you do is fine. And if we have to throw it out, that gives you permission. And I also think that resistance is okay. And when we have space to talk about it, it does allow us to show up.
and just staying curious and open.
Yeah.
I am noticing that I'm having a spate of not being able to go back and listen to the episodes we've done recently. It's funny.
Are you attaching meaning to that, or how are you
No.
feeling about that?
I'm just staying open and curious because I usually do enjoy re-listening to them. And I don't know. I think it's hinting at there's some sort of relationship with myself right now that needs to have some grace and some kindness. I've got just so much going on.
You have a lot going on. Both of us have had just a very challenging, draining, up and down, having to be present for a lot with some beautiful connections. And for me, some beautiful serendipity in the midst of some incredible dysregulation. You and I both have been going through a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I hate being vague in the podcast, but it's been really, really intense. Like kind of a lot of like once in a lifetime type of stuff that thankfully won't happen regularly. It's all learning and growth, but you get to be like, no more things. And then stuff like that's more normal, but just challenging parenting. My elder child was in the hospital. Like it's just real life is, oof. I'm very, very blessed in many, many ways. And I like to tell people if it's really hard, it doesn't mean you're not doing it right.
Right.
It's just hard.
Which is why I love the work that we do here, that we can talk about how hard it is and how we continue to show up for ourselves and for each other, even in impaired, stressed states. It doesn't have to be perfect. And a couple times this week, you and I have talked, and I don't know if you cried this week. I know I cried a couple times. And it's not that anything was resolved, but just that connection of feeling seen and heard and held in what I was going through. That just feels yummy. And sometimes there's nothing anybody can do and things are just hard and we have to sit with uncertainty or not knowing or just kind of how it is.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Since I made that kind of flip in my life, and I've done it in a couple of ways. One is instead of getting frustrated that I've miscommunicated with someone, I assume miscommunication is probably the baseline and whatever effort it takes to communicate clearly. And then the same thing with loneliness. I'm alone a lot of the time, and that's actually our natural state. It's how we come in, it's how we go out. And when I have those points of connection, they can be so glorious and I can enjoy them. And they're beautiful and poignant. They make me cry a lot, actually. And then kind of resting back into that. And there was the third thing I was going to mention. Now I can't remember what it is. But it makes it, I don't know, it was a game changer for me. Flipping that around. And I guess how that's connecting to what you were saying was, it's really not this either or. It's like both and. And if the tears can be included, and if it's really all okay.
Yeah. I know this week my son was supposed to deploy on Wednesday for the Navy and he didn't. There have been some challenges, some hangups with some of his medical stuff. He's had to jump through all kinds of hoops. We moved my other son, Daniel, into the home where the Navy son lives. There were some major upsets that day, which again, I'm not going to talk about it because it's not my story to share, but Steve and I ended up coming home early from seeing the kids and we were going to celebrate their birthdays. And the whole drive home, Steve and I were just processing what happened, and it was confusing and it was upsetting and it was just a lot of uncertainty, and the week unfolded, and it appears that things are okay, but just a number of things happened that were really just really hard. And we didn't think that we'd be able to spend this birthday with our kids because Josh was supposed to be deployed and the kids and their girlfriends are here. And today we're going to go out and have a meal together. We have a cake. We're celebrating them. So just this mix of things. And I had a major upset in a relationship, which I'm not going to talk too much about. And it's ironic that in this exploration of learning about HSP and then learning I'm autistic, I'm finding these other highly sensitive therapists who also specialized in HSP and now are learning that they're autistic. And I'm really needing to find some people that are in the same place that I'm at. I have questions. I have shared experiences. Probably when you discovered that you were an HSP, you went through your life and reassessed everything and you wanted to find your people. And I'm just having some incredibly, incredibly sweet connections and looking at my previous relationships through the lens of autism and where I've struggled and where I have unrealistic expectations, and also seeing what I really need to have in my relationships, which means that I may have less friends, but the friends that I do have are able to meet my needs in a way that works for someone like me. It's just been such an interesting mix this week.
Yeah. I mean, there has to be something too when you get to know yourself better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I know we were talking about developmental trajectories of friendships. They grow and you learn about each other instead of it being, I'm not sure I want to get into that.
Okay.
Not sure.
I know. I've noticed the last handful of recordings, there's just been so much going on that neither one of us are really in a place or a position to give specifics about. So we're doing the best we can to give you some concrete, tangible stuff, but there's just a lot right now that we're not in a place to talk about.
You know, it's so funny too, because usually my life is like really boring. And it's, it'll be, what did we say? Like even making some recordings and then like not airing them for a year.
Right. Right.
And it all blows over.
Right.
Sheesh.
I know. Well, it's interesting too. This is a little bit of an aside, but I think it relates to that. I had paddled with a couple groups and I haven't paddled with them because I hurt my back. And it's interesting to see how much anxiety I had about paddling. They're two different groups. I had anxiety for different reasons, but even one of the groups that I feel very comfortable with, I just found myself feeling really anxious heading to this paddle. And I felt kind of annoyed that it's like, sometimes it just feels hard being me because I know these people, I like them, they like me, I'm capable of doing the paddle. And like, what is that anxiety? And then it was kind of cool because I did almost a 9-mile paddle on Saturday, saw dolphins. Oh my gosh, we saw a pod of, I think, 8 dolphins and they just were skimming the surface right where we were paddling. I got some great video. And then you and I were supposed to record on Sunday because we didn't record Wednesday. We can't record this Wednesday because everything is just we've just had lots of changes. And then Pat asked if I wanted to paddle Sunday. And I normally don't like paddling 2 days in a row, but I wanted to do it all. And I did. And it's funny, I didn't have anxiety about paddling with Pat. So, I'm sharing this with the intention of sometimes we do things that we're very familiar and comfortable with, and we still feel resistant. We still have anxiety. We still have to just walk through that. And knowing or trying to figure out when do I need to honor and listen and not push through things. But I know generally around paddling, I go and I have a great time. And especially with all the change that's going on in my life right now, the more physical outlets I have, the better off I am and the better off everybody around me is.
Yeah, I need to learn that lesson.
Yeah.
I like what you were saying with anxiety these days. I know for myself, while it's really intellectually satisfying to come up with a big story about what it means, I've learned that it serves me a lot better sometimes to just create the space to experience it, stay curious about it, because sometimes the story perpetuates it so much. And then, so I know if you're a deep feeler, and I guess the deep thinker goes with it too usually, but sometimes it's like, okay, thinker, take a step back. I'm just going to dive into the physical sensations of whatever this feeling is and be attentive to it, tend to it. And then, I don't know, kind of split the thinking off later.
Yeah.
Get curious.
I can tell you that the lessons that feel the most present for me, and it feels like they're a lot and it feels like they're big and that they're hard, but just walking through it, not everybody's going to like me. I don't have to want to be with other people. It's okay for me to say, I want to do this, but I don't want to do that. People are not always going to understand and get me. This is one, I don't know if we're going to talk about it today, but I do want to talk about because that is a major point of dysregulation for me. in close relationships if I feel like I'm not being seen and heard. And I think I lose a sense of autonomy of you're not hearing me, you're not honoring my lived experience. And I'm looking at a history in relationships and where this has gotten into challenges. I'm extremely pedantic. Wording and languaging and phrasing is really, really important to me. I suspect that part of this is a subtype of autism that I'm pretty confident that I have. And language has always been very important, and why it can be really dysregulating when somebody uses language in a certain way around me that I feel like, I don't know, I just don't feel seen and heard. It really pushes up against something. And learning to really speak my truth, because I don't know about you, but I was raised to be polite and don't worry about hurting people's feelings and don't upset people and all of that stuff. And I really had an opportunity this week and a few weeks ago to just be very, very direct and blunt about what my experience was, because I kind of tried to do it in a passive way that didn't work. And then I finally had to just kind of have a come to so-and-so talk. And it was scary and empowering. And I also sat with it. I checked it out with you. I checked it out with a couple other people because I just don't want to be reactive. These are difficult, but very powerful lessons that I think we all want to step into who we are. And having to manage such a high amount of dysregulation for an extended amount of time, that is just plain hard. It's just plain hard.
Yeah, it's a lot of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And put that against just how busy our lifestyles can be today.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have time. We really just don't have time for it. And that's a shame, because that's tending to our lived experience. And then if we're not doing that for ourselves, like, how can we show up and do it for each other? And I think about this in terms of parenting a lot too, because then when do we have the time of day to actually parent in a way that the little half-baked brains need
Right.
us to tend to things, attend.
Right.
And when we're rushing from one thing to the next, that can be so challenging. I will say that I'm finding the directness so refreshing. Because another part of like not having time, I guess, is like, oh gosh, I just don't want to guess.
Mm-hmm.
The clarity that comes with, and we can generally, I believe in basic goodness. Humans are basically good, right? Nobody's walking around feet hitting the floor in the morning, figuring out how they can get under other people's skin or irritate people or bother people. I'm not saying all that there aren't some humans that maybe struggle with that, but most don't. And so the directness, even when it's the shared experience of okay, I'm a no for this, and sometimes I don't even know why I'm a no. I just know my body's telling me I'm a no, and I'm disappointing someone, but they're able to talk to me about it. And we're able to share that experience. There's something about the directness of it all when we're willing to not do the whole, and I was raised the same way, be polite. I had a very religious Catholic upbringing and was like, yeah. And it was really overvalued. And it's hard to center yourself and to be authentic when you're not brought up that way. And it's funny with parenting, because I'll catch myself mid-sentence with my daughter when I'm telling her to like be nice. And I'm like, wait a minute, back up, tune into your body. What do you want right now? And because we can do things with kindness, right? Have limits and share our truth with people with kindness. But kindness is different than niceness.
Yeah. Well, there were a couple of things. I saw some parenting threads this week, and even something that I had commented on. There's a creator on Instagram who cuts hair for autistic kids. I've also seen him cut hair for a little boy who had Down syndrome. And to look at the amount of consent that goes on in this, where the child gets to say start, stop, and you can see the barber turning on the razor, turning it off, really allowing the child to lead. It's funny, I made a comment on this a couple of weeks ago, and every time I check Instagram, people are responding or liking my response, because I said, this is consent. You're giving the child autonomy and a sense of control in what can feel like a very overwhelming situation with bright lights and loud noises and somebody messing with your hair and having to sit and being restrained, or somebody who has a brain that's wired differently. Somebody commented yesterday about, I never gave my kids control. And I'm seeing some of these parenting threads about 18-year-olds that are doing things that are kind of developmentally what you would expect. You wouldn't hope for it because you want your kids to do what they're supposed to. But overall, these kids are doing very well. And the question was, what consequences do I give my 18-year-old? And I just have such strong feelings about consent and relationship that you talk with the child, with the kidult, and you talk to them about what happened and what are they needing. One of the threads was about, my kid doesn't respect me and wants to be respected. And I'm like, well, what does respect look like to the kidult? What are they wanting that they're not getting? And how can you partner and not have power over, but have power with? But I think we have such a tendency to want to, because I said so, because I'm the parent, I've already asked you, you should be doing what I'm doing. And I'm not saying that I don't get into that. And you and I have talked about this sometimes when you're parenting, and that I find I have a reaction like, ooh, I'd be frustrated by now, but you have a lot more room for your kids to be where they are. And I find sometimes that I'm like, ooh, I'm uncomfortable. You get to parent how you want. I'm feeling afraid that I'm sounding judgmental. Are you feeling judged?
No.
Okay.
No. No, I mean, I see it as like we all have like baked in to our culture, like some parenting ideas that we'll feel it. Like your body's responding because your body is really trained in whatever's baked in. You know what I mean? So I don't find it judgmental. No.
Yeah. They're just differences. But how can we learn not only with our children, but with our partners, with our friends, with our colleagues, to have this sense of consent and working together to get curious about the other person's experience versus having to have power over or tell people what they should be doing or how they should be doing, or giving unsolicited advice and information when it may not be warranted. And you and I talked about this last night, that I often remind you of things because that's my way of loving you and you appreciate it. But if this were a different relationship, you could get really annoyed with me for reminding you about things.
Yeah, no, I really need your reminders. Thank you very much. I do appreciate them.
But I think in all of these, we can often see ourselves on many sides of the situation, because the other thing you and I were talking about is this need to explain, or often to ask questions, or to question authority or why there are reasons. And I know that that has been offensive to people sometimes when I've done that. And I also know that specifically in a situation recently, I felt like somebody was doing this to me and questioning my experience. And it really pushed my buttons because I wanted to be the expert in my own life and not be told about air quote experts. And I can see this from all sides. So you and I have been talking about this for a couple days now.
Yeah. Yep. I don't know. I think there's so much here to unpack, right? Like, do we have the time to listen? What's that Georgia O'Keeffe quote? Oh gosh, it's so good, right? Like, it takes time to see a flower, and we don't have time, right? We don't have time to really see. It takes time to have a friend. And, we live in this perfectionistic society that we want it to just look a certain way. And we're already geared up where like we can't see the whole, we can only see facets. We can only see from wherever we're standing in the room, so to speak, right? And then it's just like, I know I can't say cluster F on your podcast.
Cluster duck.
Cluster duck. It's like, and then throw on the physical sensations that accompany fear, dysregulation. We're kind of sunk. So taking a big deep breath, taking a step back, recognizing that there's so many different ways to be human, so many different perspectives to have. One of my favorite quotes of all time, I forget who said it off the top of my head right now, some ancient kind of thing, is like, I'm human and therefore nothing human is foreign to me. Like, it really creates the space to be like, okay, well, what is it like? And we're not arguing about there's one narrative that's going to rule here. It's having space for other people's narratives, including children, so that we can really get to know them and where are they at developmentally with what their perspective is. And we may not know. So if a person's behavior to us is really like just mystifying and we don't get it, if we had a baseline of knowing that if we heard the full story, it would make sense. Like that's another thing that I just like really trust. So we're back to having the time to listen. I love your precision with words. I'm a total word nerd myself. But we're using these little symbols to try to communicate a far vaster experience. So sometimes it's language that fails us. But we're back to letting each other be this expert status and that it's okay wherever you are.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think that my being pedantic is my autism. It's always been important to me, but like language and learning not to correct people's grammar or spelling. But to notice quietly from afar.
Yeah. My daughter has a sticker on her water bottle that she's silently correcting your grammar.
I like that.
We're all
I like that.
We're all neurodiverse in this household. It's lots of fun.
Yeah.
And it is. Exactly. I mean that actually, because I don't know, I've come to appreciate it as like evolution. It's happening.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too when we talk about consent. I know I've talked about our living room and the chairs and the kids and stuff, but we have a full house this week, which means that if everybody's in the living room, there is no place to sit. And as you know, I have my chair. And it's really interesting that if somebody sits in it and I come into the room and they go like, do you want your chair? Then I'm really okay sharing it. But when somebody sits in it and I perceive, I'm not saying this is what's going on, but I perceive a sense of entitlement, then I get mad and I have a hard time saying something and I feel resentful. So again, this whole idea of consent and autonomy, and I know that we can talk about it as codependency, that whoever's in the chair shouldn't have to read my feelings. And everybody knows that this is mama's chair. This isn't like anytime anyone's sitting in the house and I walk by that they have to offer to give up their seat for me. We're not talking about that. We're talking about one specific chair. But I am just finding that if I have a sense of autonomy and my thoughts and feelings, I mean, this is what you and I talked about when you were here visiting. There was so much, how does this work for you? What do you want to do? I don't know. Do you need to rest? Do you want to go out? That is so regulating to my nervous system. And that sense of attunement and accommodation really works well for me. And I get that we don't get that when we live or work with other people. But when that is part of the mix, man, it just makes such a difference for me.
Yeah, as you're talking and looking outward at like the places where we can't have it, right? So we can have it between us. And then there are lots of places out in the world where we can't have it, right? And we have to be okay with that. And I immediately went to, well, what about internally? Like, can we give ourselves that? Just that real permission to be like, if you're going through something, you can't human wrong. Right? Like you wouldn't go up to a horse and say, hey, you're horsing wrong. Like, you just can't do it. So can we knock it off with the whole, well, where I'm going to go with this is it's like, no, that's not an abnormality. It's human.
Right.
And can we understand it in a context, both a, temporal context, like what's going on around you right now and where are you, but also in a learned history context. Right. Yeah. So, yeah. And now we're back to being the expert in your own life.
Right. Right. Well, it's interesting too, because I've really been looking at where am I the most comfortable and where am I don't want to say the least comfortable, but I find that I'm the most comfortable when I can talk about whatever's going on and I'm not doing the self-monitoring. And the self-monitoring it's so exhausting, but it's, oh, you asked me about what am I doing today? I need to ask you back. That sense of reciprocity. Am I talking too much? Is there enough? Am I showing interest in you? Am I asking you enough questions? Is there an exchange? That is going on for me constantly, and it is so exhausting. And because my nervous system has to be so alert, I really lack spontaneity. I lack playfulness. My sense of humor goes down because in order to be more authentic, my nervous system has to be relaxed. And it's interesting. I noticed I've been curious about like, what is the play between my ADHD and my autism? And y'all, as I'm exploring this, I'm just sharing about my own experience and my own interpretation. I could be wrong. If you're an expert and I'm getting it wrong, shoot me an email, set me straight. I want to create accurate information. And sometimes the language that I use, I think in an episode recently, we talked about the double empathy bind, and I looked it up afterwards and we used it incorrectly. And I can't remember what the correct form is, but it's going to happen. And I want to be perfect, and I'm human.
Maybe we were advancing the idea.
Maybe. Well, and that's the other thing that you and I keep talking about, all of these new ways of looking at things. And I was watching, there's a creator who's autistic. She's got 2 PhDs, and one I think is in neuropsychology. And she was talking about looking at neuropsychology and the DSM and how they don't talk to each other. And she has some theories about some things, which I found incredibly fascinating. And so even though there's things in the literature, often one discipline is not talking to another discipline. We don't have enough people that are doing the research, that are on the inside of the group and asking the questions and interpreting the data. So even though something is written, we don't know for sure that that's how it is. But I digress. What I noticed when you were here is, because my nervous system was so relaxed, my ADHD came up, and I found myself interrupting you. But I also was more playful, more spontaneous, more go with the flow, because my nervous system was so relaxed that then my ADHD pops up. But when I'm doing all that self-monitoring, I don't interrupt and I pause, and I'm spending so much energy controlling what I think I'm supposed to be doing to have an appropriate social interaction with someone. It's just interesting.
Yeah, it sounds exhausting.
It's ducking exhausting. And there are environments where they don't really warrant us being who we are.
Right.
And there are environments where I go and I do activities, or there's a specific reason for getting together with a certain group of people for certain things. And if I have a lot of stuff going on in my life, that's not the place where I share it, because we're there to accomplish a task or an activity or something. And that's not a bad thing. But finding different places where I can be authentic and really be exactly who I am. And that's when I wonder, like, am I saying too much? Am I being too vulnerable? Am I being too needy? Am I scaring people away? But it's so authentic that it just feels delicious when I find someone who's a good match for that and equally appreciates that level of honesty and shares back. There's nothing better in the world to me.
Yeah, it's worth the risk, right?
Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge that it is a risk.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is part of that developmental trajectory in friendship. If a friendship any relationship gets to a certain point, it's not even, I wouldn't even want to think that it like fails in air quotes. It's just time to diverge, or it's gone as far as it's going to go. Oh my God, I totally just lost my train of thought.
Don't you hate when that happens?
I do. What were you saying right before I started talking?
About attunement and being vulnerable and having it just feel really yummy.
Thank you. See, together we have one brain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is a risk. And what flashed into my mind was one of the first times that I risked it with you. And I think Brene Brown calls it like a vulnerability hangover, where I was like, okay, now I know, like, you're never going to want me on the podcast again. You know who I really am now. And I'm just a piece of shirt or whatever, because we can be really mean to ourselves because we're human, and it just seems to be part of the game. Right. And, if I could have told that woman, however many, it was a couple of years ago now, or maybe a year and a half ago, that taking that risk was going to go to a completely different place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I was not raised with that level of openness, because it was show up in a certain way or else. And it's like, well, no one told you, like, or else what?
Right. Well, I was thinking that quite often on this podcast, I've talked about doing friendships flow very slowly, allowing them to unfold and exposing a little bit, seeing how it goes, exposing a little bit more. And I have to say that I broke all of my rules with this therapist who specializes in HSP and just got diagnosed autistic. And I made a conscious choice to do it. And it feels really scary because it's all the things that I think we do when we're neurodivergent and we find somebody else who's neurodivergent. I also want to say, I am very aware of myself, my shortcomings, my strengths, my being pedantic, how that affects me if somebody says something to me and it activates that piece. It feels like I lose that sense of autonomy. And this person also has a very high level of skill and awareness. So I think that we have an advantage, but I generally do not jump into communicating with somebody this quickly in depth, as vulnerably, and I'm okay with it. So if you follow my rules are changing. And hopefully, really what I would love the topic of this podcast or this episode to be about is who is the authority in your life and who are you allowing to be the authority? And if I say go slow and for you it works to jump in quickly and that works for you and you're getting the results that you want, do what works for you. I'm just sharing my own experience and my position changes as I get new information. So, and I've found myself as I've been going through these challenges of having you and some other people check my thoughts about things, if I'm providing a response, because I want to make sure that I'm not going off on a tangent. And it's a little bit hard because my feelings are so high that I often can't tell what I'm thinking or feeling. And so I'm trusting a handful of other people to make sure that I'm in check, but I'm not always even real clear. So it's messy. The bottom line is it's messy.
Yeah. Yeah. It was funny when you said a while back that people aren't always going to get you. I had the thought, I'm like, sure, half the time I don't get myself. You know, it's like we are really, you know, we're verbs, not nouns. It's hard to nail us down. It is messy.
I think we have so many expectations of ourselves and how we want other people to show up in relationships, even if we don't know it. I think it just makes it hard. And I think that's probably been the hardest part of relationships for me is expectations and disappointments and often having unrealistic expectations. Sometimes staying in relationships for too long. And is it okay to choose to not stay in a relationship? Those are all hard things.
Yeah. And can it be done with kindness? I think that's the big thing. And then those boundaries, like what's needed.
Yeah. We're needing to wrap up. Is there anything else?
Nope. Yes, there's tons, but we'll talk about it later.
So how do you feel about recording now that we've done it?
You know, I'm just going to trust. I'm not here to judge. I'm really not. I'll leave it up to you.
Well, we released that one episode that we thought we didn't know if it was going to go anywhere. And I think it turned out okay. So I'm just going to trust.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for being here today, Resistance and all.
Thank you, my dear friend.
You too.
Bye.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye. Hey again. So I'm curious to know, did that resonate for you? Did you see yourself in some of those things? Relationships are hard. Boundaries are hard. Feeling seen and heard is hard. Knowing what to say is hard. After we stopped recording, Jen and I stayed on and we talked about a current situation that I'm just flummoxed by. We talked about it for a while and she's like, I don't even know what to tell you. I'm like, I don't even know what to say. That sometimes we just don't even know what to say and we just have to sit with things. But having someone who will join us in our uncertainty, in our anger, in our hurt, in our disappointment, in our frustration, in our joy, all of those things are really, really powerful. And that presence of having somebody present for you while you're trying to sort things out can be really helpful. If you're struggling in relationships, in parenting, and trying to figure out how do you prioritize the relationship, how do you communicate, how do you set boundaries, how do you have difficult conversations, how do you manage dysregulation, how do you manage anxiety, how do you center on what it is that you're needing, how do you find your voice and set the people-pleasing aside. I mean, these are just all really common things that I think many of us struggle with. If you'd like to work with Jen, you can reach out to her at Jen@Heartfulness Consulting. I love sending you to my website because I have a form that helps me understand what it is that you're wanting as far as do you want to meet over Zoom or a HIPAA compliant platform? What time zone are you in? What are days and times that are good for you? So you can go to my website at unapologeticallysensitive.com. I would love to talk to you. If you have feedback about this episode, feel free to reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. I hope you are doing well. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. How you show up in the world is perfect. The world needs you. You have gifts and talents to offer the world. You may not fit in with everybody else, but there are your people and you have special things to offer the world. You have a right to be here. You have a right to take up space. It's okay if people don't agree with you. It's okay if people don't like you. It's okay if people don't understand you. That who you are matters. Your feelings matter. You are important. You are special. And I'm so glad you were here today. Have a blessed day.